Part two of the screencast, Roaring Twenties, was about change. So we are about to move on to the last part, which is, I believe, how Americans are living. So the Roaring Twenties really gets the start of suburban growth in America. Prior to that, Americans were either living urban or rural, and now we have a third option, which is the suburbs. So when we look at this particular image here, this is what you would call the central business district, and this is actually a way that the United States develops. Here you have a major city. It could be New York, it could be Philly, it could be Camden, it could be Trenton. As this gets increased in population and as infrastructure is developed here, people that can afford move out and then they create the suburbs, or they create yet another business district, which then you have another city that develops and then you just keep on expanding outward. So they start to do a study about Middletown and looking at the changing attitudes and what's happening within the city. And the consensus could be that city life kind of sucks. People do not want to live there. So a Levittown is the attempt to create some of those first suburbs. Keep in mind, suburban growth really is going to boom in the 40s and into the 50s, but it does have its origins in the 20s, which is how Americans live. So this is more of a 1940s image where you see the suburbs really developed. So in the 1920s, it's just really looking at some of those third options. Why? Because people do not want to live in the cramped urban environment. Here you have a woman who is getting her clothes ready in a tenement. Keep in mind, if you're living in urban America, especially in the 1920s, you're probably raising children. And this child right here is possibly, maybe this high up. So if you want to give your child some outdoor fresh air, you could buy this contraption. Keep in mind, the 20s also has some technological changes and advances, and your child can hang outside in this cage-like contraption. Nice. So I said before that a tenement is what that woman was at. So if we're looking at this particular image here, um, we could also say that maybe that woman is somewhere in this area. So a tenement is a structure, and here you see the interior of the tenement. So let's just take this area right here, the parlor. That could be this section right here. You have the parlor, living room, bedroom. Notice how you have shared quarters for like kitchen and restroom areas right here. But at the end of the day, you have a situation where people are living in cramped conditions. This is a photograph from Jacob Riis, who did the piece How the Other Half Lives, where he looked at urban America and looked at the cramped conditions that Americans were living in. Keep in mind, in the 1920s, we're also starting to build the cities, and the cities are starting to go up higher. Here you have an image of the Empire State Building being constructed, and that's kind of what's going on there. So you can put that information down for how Americans live, which I think is a part of living right here. So I've said before, urban and rural America. You cannot look and think about today and the divide between urban and rural America without thinking about present day. Urban and rural America still divided. So it has its origins in the 20s, and that's where that division really starts to begin, because I think the issues urban and rural America face are just too different. So I just use this electoral college map to kind of show the division within America and how we probably are still victims to some of the issues in the 20s. This is a map of New Jersey, and what's interesting about this is the Democrats tend to be in the condensed urban areas of America. So this is actually where the New Jersey Turnpike is, right here in this particular area. And then this is the City Expressway. So New Jersey is a pretty good microcosm of what happens on a national level. So here, this particular slide is just showing you statistics. And we start in, let's see, 1910, and you have urban and rural. And you start to notice that the rural population is starting to go down as we move on. So in the 1930s, what's the percent rural? 43%. And then here we're 36%. So it tends to go down. In urban and rural America, just completely different way of doing things. In rural America, you have a smaller community, whereas urban environment, maybe as a child you were able to play. Keep in mind the work is different from farming to working in factories. And again, those issues might be very different, which is possibly the reason why people tend to vote the way that they do. So I asked the question, has it changed? Rural America, prior to the 1920s, prior to city life really starting to take off, you saw a situation where America was just slow. It was slow paced. It definitely didn't have the speed, the hustle and bustle, and all of those things tend to change America, where the feeling starts to be, what, maybe I got to get out of here. Maybe there's too many immigrants. Technology is really changing the way that we live. and people tend to start to have a less interest in religion. Take a look at the Scopes trial for an example. I believe that's in here. We'll get to it. Entertainment. So entertainment, when I use the term palace of consumption and movie theaters, the golden age of movie theaters. This is what I'm talking about here. This is a movie theater in the 1920s when the film industry is really about to take off as technology starts to improve. Movie theaters were viewed as grand, institutions. People put a lot of investment, a lot of money into these things. And here you could see a perfect example. I mean, compare this, just beautiful movie theater to your current Lowe's or your current Regal movie theater. I mean, these images are just, they're just beautiful. The decoration, the attention to detail, the sculptures, the light fixtures, all of these things. In the 1920s, the issue here is that the movie theater is about to change. So if you're wondering where the blackface issue comes in, well, that's a result of black actors not being allowed to act and being barred from acting. And apparently, white actors were usually cast to play black characters in film, which is going on here. And so in the 1920s, keep in mind, it's the golden age of the movie theaters. They're about to take off. And you have a situation where the technology gets to a point where sound can now be placed into a film. Prior to that, movies were silent, which means that you needed to act out the scene without any sort of dialogue. So, for a quick test here, let's just pause this for a second. But before you pause it, what I want you to do is try to communicate acting sad without saying anything through your nonverbal behavior. So on three, that's what I want you to do. 1, 2, 3. All right, not sure what you did. I can tell you what I did, which was nothing. I just pretty much sat here. But anyway, I just use that one as an example there because you start to see tension within the film industry with regard to technology. Chaplin, who was an actor that definitely built his career on silent films, is really upset about the changing direction of film. And he was struggling with this particular dilemma. How does he stay true to his art of acting with sound? So if you take that same thing, that same example, and I said, okay, well, act sad, and now you can say something, you can just vocalize that. Maybe you can cry and people would know. Chaplin's argument was that silent films is art and that the technology of films using sound, which, introduction of sound in The Jazz Singer, which was the first talkie. I mean, films with voice were called talkies. Why? Because people were talking in them. And so Chaplin is really concerned about this. And he is under pressure because, silent movies are about to go away. And he's going to have to talk. And the first film where he talks is in the film Modern Times. And he was brilliant in his response, and we will address that at a later day. But he has a pretty interesting take on how he is going to stay true to his art and, conform to the talkie method. Shopping, let's move on to another one. So all of the prior items can go under entertainment. We're moving on to shopping. As I said before, shopping, the palace of consumption, just like movie theaters, a lot of investment, a lot of, things designed to trick the eye, to get people attracted to the palace of consumption, which was a 1920s way of saying a department store. Now, you're probably not familiar with stores department stores because they're starting to close down. But there was a time when department stores pretty much sold everything, hardware stuff, TVs, clothing, all types of items. Here you could see a map of some of those particular departments that were available at one of these palaces of consumption. There is one left that I could think about that's in the area. If anybody looks up the Philly Macy's, they definitely have this particular look. They're on the historic registry, so you might want to take a look at that. It's definitely, an experience to go into that particular Macy's. Sears gets its start here, and they're using the catalog system to try to attract people. And we could see Sears on the decline, 2019, 2020, getting ready to close up. So Americans are shopping at the same stores, watching the same movies. What this creates is a common American culture, or a common shared culture. Think about it. If you all saw Modern Times, and that would give us a way to bond. So we already established that immigrants are here, and immigrants, maybe they speak a different language, but if they watch the film Modern Times, that could be something that kind of unifies us as Americans. Common brands like Gillette razor blades, or the radio. People are listening to the radio, maybe listening to the same radio programs, the same songs, and this is a way to bond Americans, to drop your cultural identity and come aboard on unifying America. If I said something like Kotex, if I said something like Kleenex, we're talking about common brands that everybody possibly knows. If I say Kleenex, you probably know what that means. Well, the Kleenex is a result of 1920s marketing, which also gets its start here. So in the 1920s, what you want to put down is advertisements trying to create that common shared culture. Americans are buying stuff in the same place, and Americans are also buying things on credit. This is a Depression 20s issue, but credit is something that's fairly new in the 1920s. And what winds up happening is that Americans are being asked to buy now, pay later, which leads to a situation where Americans are starting to buy so much that it's starting to create a boom in the economy. So even our spending habits are starting to change, where people used to pay with cash and now they're paying with credit. And this is going to temporarily be good for business, but it's going to be one of the contributing causes for the depression. 20s was about change. So Americans were shopping the same stores, watching the same movies, and being persuaded by ads. How could these actions create a common shared culture? This is something that we've already addressed. And the end goal is that we are becoming American. So I put all of these immigrant groups here. However, if we're watching and doing all of these things here, because you can only go to one movie, you can only go to one store, you can only look at certain ads here. We're creating a common American culture. Let's get back to the economy and business. So with the economy, one of the things that is really creating a boom in the economy is Ford and the Model T. Take a look at this stat here, 1.5 to 5 million by the late 20s. The car was so popular that people were known to go on what was called a carcation. A carcation, which was a makeshift tent right here where you see two cars, and that is the hotel. This is the hotel right here. Motel, which really gets the name motel from the motorists. Motel, hotel, two different things. But motels are a result of this 1920s car culture that starts to peak in the 40s and 50s. So here you see two Americans. They seem to be really happy, especially this guy. I mean, he just looks very miserable, and she just looks like she's coming along because I don't know what her reason would be. Anyway, how much did Ford produce? Take a look at these numbers. This is the amount of cars that he produced. Take a look at that. 78 million. That's a lot of jobs. Keep in mind, that's a lot of metal, that's a lot of rubber, that's a lot of glass, that's a lot of wood, that's a lot of fabric. Every car that Ford makes is going to create a boom in another area. That's a lot of roads, that's a lot of gas. I could go on, that's a lot of oil. And that is going to create a boom. When we get to the Depression, we're going to start looking at this particular model of the business cycle. Model T, Ford, and credit creates a boom. The economy is starting to boom, and eventually this all levels out, and then boom, you have a collapse. When we get to this particular point here, we need to figure out a way to resolve the issue, and you could do this with so many things. World War I creates a boom. Why? Because we need gas masks, we need tanks, we need planes. Boom, then the war is over. Boom, the economy starts to go down. We have a reverse effect. At E, government better do something. E and A are the same thing. The only difference is it's starting another part of the cycle. You can either go up or you could go down, depending on what's going to happen. You could take computer technology in the 1990s. Computer technology takes off. Boom, there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of businesses. The internet is starting to take off. And then eventually all of that levels out, and then some of those particular jobs are lost. If we look at the Trump economy in 2020, if we look at March with COVID, that is what's going to get the economy moving down. So what did Trump do? He said, you know what? We need to figure out a way to get a stimulus. We need to get money in the hands of Americans. So he was at point E, realizing that the economy was about to go down and we needed to go up. So he think, let's pass some sort of stimulus. So let's get $1,200 in the hands of every American that they're going to spend, and then it would go up. So just throwing that out as a side note. Anyway, so car creates a boom. I've already addressed the items that are going to be needed to make the car, and we could see the car's impact in this particular image where I counted 23 Model T Fords right there. So again, not only is city life starting to increase because the influx of African Americans, the influx of immigrants, the influx of jobs, but now we have this Model T Ford to deal with, and the city life is just becoming a nightmare. Something. The car vacation, look at that. On the beach with your car. Maybe this guy doesn't want to go out. Whatever. How do Americans buy the Model T Ford? By credit, as we said before. Paying with cash is something that was prior to the 1920s, and now Americans are paying with credit, and that is definitely going to change the spending habits of Americans to the point where even stocks were purchased with credit. And this is what's going to lead to the stock market crash, because there is something called buying on the margin, where you can basically buy stock with credit. This is going to be difficult to understand. I don't necessarily know how many of you are going to pick up on this, but we will look at this at a later detail, in greater detail. So when you buy stock on the margin, you're pretty much buying stock with a loan. So let's just say the stock is $10. You put in $5, and then you borrow $5 from your investor, and you better hope that that stock goes up. So let's just take an example. You put in $5. The firm that your broker taking a loan from puts in $5. The stock costs $10. So you paid $10. If tomorrow the stock is worth $15, you have enough money to pay back your investor their $5. You put in $5, so you get your $5 back, and then you wind up in a situation where you have an additional $5. If the stock goes down, let's just say you borrowed $5, you put in $5, the stock was $10, and now the stock is worth $2. Wow, you just lost your $5 and you still owe your investor $5. Why does any of this matter? Well, because Americans with this new concept of credit are going to start buying stock with credit, and this is going to create a huge boom in the stock market. And all of that is going to level out when we get to the depression. That's buying on the margin. It leads to what I call in class fake demand, and that is fueling the 1920s economy. So people buying with credit is creating a fake boom in the economy, and people are going to respond to that in certain ways. What other issues are going on in the 1920s? The fight for abortion. Prior to the 1920s, the Comstock Law was a way to target people with abortions, seeking abortions. And Madame Restell, Margaret Sanger, Mary Quee were three women, and there were others that were really trying to stand in the way of the Comstock Law to figure out a way to get women abortion. And these women were definitely targeted. Sometimes they were targeted for their, violation of the law with helping women get abortions, obscene material. During the war, they were targeted through the Espionage Act. Margaret Sanger wanted to educate women about reproduction, and she published numerous magazines. The publication of this magazine would definitely be a violation of the Comstock laws, because the Comstock laws went after anything that was obscene or lewd. So this book right here could be obscene or lewd. So here we have an example of women fighting to change reproductive rights, and some of the heroes that wind up fighting for that. What did the law say about abortion? Unless that you can only get the abortion if the mother's life was threatened. So the end result was that if the woman's life was threatened, you can perform the procedure. So imagine the police in the 1920s showing up. The doctor performing the procedure says that he has to save the woman's life. That would be a way to really find a loophole around the legislation, because the legislation is saying you can't get the abortion, but this state law is saying that you can perform the procedure if the woman's life is threatened. The end result is that you're going to have numerous examples where people are going to, be in a situation where they're going to get these procedures, but they are breaking the law. And then, of course, go back to the four virtues for women. And, men are arguing that, well, you just don't want to get married because, if you do have the child, that possibly could be something that restricts you, because you have to be devoted to your family as opposed to yourself. So if you were to allow abortion, that would be an example of tainting the purity of the glass of water. Mentioned before about the religion. And the Scopes trial involves a high school teacher who teaches evolution, and this was viewed as a way of once again tainting the glass of water, because you can't teach religion, especially in a society that always talked about God making everything. And here we have some anti-evolution photograph from the Scopes trial. If we teach creationism, that is going to be the way we used to do it, but now they want to teach evolution, so it becomes another example of, eugenics. Eugenics is another issue where people were looking at the purity of genetics and saying that there are certain elements within a society that somehow destroy the purity and the level of intelligence of the society. So all of these individuals are actually people from the United States or that worked in the United States or that were part of the eugenics movement. The eugenics means the manipulation of genes to get a desired outcome. And all of these people believed in one aspect of it. What's fascinating, we usually associate eugenics movement with the Nazis, but you come to find out that the United States also, um, you know, had a eugenics movement here in the 1920s. For example, with the Kallikak family, which was Henry Goddard's research, they were trying to identify degenerate genes within a family tree and arguing that the degenerate gene should not be allowed to reproduce because that would destroy the purity of the gene pool. Take a look at this in a Supreme Court decision where they argued that a woman was going to be sterilized. Um, the ruling was it is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, so they're saying like that woman is going to have a degenerate offspring. So instead of waiting for that person, that newborn child to commit the crime or let them starve for the imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. This is in the United States where they're saying, the courts are saying that the states can sterilize people. And 1920s is definitely going to be the golden age for the eugenics movement, and that will have some consequences. Terrorism in the 1920s, we do have some acts of terrorism. I've given you the definition here. Andrew Kehoe was upset about taxes, the Wall Street bombing, upset about capitalism in America, and you see terrorist attacks happening even in the 1920s, which is part of the reason why the FBI was established to go after, anarchist type groups. Here's an image from the Wall Street bombing. Andrew Kehoe's bathhouse disaster. And that's it.